Strong Enough merch is now available. Go to strongenoughpod.com and see all the things that you can get to show your strong enough pride, as well as remind people and yourself that you are strong enough and you are worth it. Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to talk about how he was getting up for work every day feeling exhausted and irritable. Little did he know he was actually experiencing burnout. Now he's a life coach who helps other people get through their own burnout and either rekindle the relationship with their career or find a new one. Please help me welcome Rich Mitchell. Rich, how's it going today?
I'm doing great, Claudia. How are you? Nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. It feels like it's been forever since we laid eyes on one another and first met. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, me too. I think it was like a month ago, and we hit it off right there in the networking event, and it's been a lot of fun listening to you and preparing to be here tonight. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I like to be a tease here on the podcast occasionally, but I don't want to keep the audience waiting any longer because I know what you're an expert at and I know what you're going to talk about. So I would love it if you would share with them a little about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. So, my name is Rich Mitchell. I'm a life coach, and I focus on helping people with burnout, going from burnout to fulfillment. People that feel they're burned out, or they started to think about the idea that they're burnt out. And my job is to really help them understand what's happening, but also help them get to the point where they're no longer burned out, but also where they're re-fulfilled and re-engaged in their life and they have the ability to continue working and continue with their family in a much more invigorating way through into their future. So that's what I do as a profession. That my life coaching profession. As a person, I've been a professional for 30 years now. I spent about 20 years in education. I moved into the life coaching space a few months ago full time. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, but full time. And I'm a single dad. I have 3 kids. My daughter's 13, and my boys are 8 and 6. And we hang out together, and we do all the things that we can together, and create adventures with each other. And right now, my boys are into fishing, so I take them fishing on the weekends. And my daughter, she plays the trumpet and she runs cross country, so she's really excited to get back to school, so that she doesn't have to be at home with the boys all day anymore. And yeah, we're having a great time. So it's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk.
So, before we get into the main topic here, how are we feeling about a teen daughter at home right now?
It's great. I mean, she's an old soul, so she's kind of like, in some ways she's like 28, and in some ways she's a very mature kid, that she does the teenage thing of hanging out in her room and texting her friends, but ultimately she's fantastic. She does all the things that you would hope that a daughter would do. She's a really good student. She plays a trumpet, like I said, runs cross country, which kind of came out of nowhere. As far as for me, for her athletic element, I ran. I love to run, but not competitively. So that was a surprise, which is great. That she's figuring it out on her own, and she's really enjoying the things that she wants to enjoy.
I love that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about life coaching and burnout. What led you to really want to focus on burnout and help other people either avoid it or get through it and become productive again and happy again?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, as I've reflected on this past 6 months and a year, and really since COVID, honestly, what I've really figured out that my story is one of burnout. I had never heard that term. 6 months ago, I had never really heard that term. It's still a new term for most people, I think. And even if it's not, it's not something that people would think was as a major problem. Like, people say they're burned out, just like they say they're tired. And so when I look back on it, I started realizing that I kind of led myself to this over my entire professional career, but over the last 3 years or so, I really started seeing when I reflect on. I didn't know this at the time, but as I reflect on it, realizing that I wasn't interested anymore in my profession. My career became a job. It's supposed to go the other way around. I had a career that I loved and did everything, and I threw everything at it, everything I possibly could at it, and it just, I wasn't interested. I lost my way, and in any profession that's difficult, but in teaching and education as well, and especially when you don't feel that you're doing any good to anyone going to work, it's very difficult to continue to go to work. And so that was a big sign. Again, these are all signs that I figured out from the reflection, not as I was going. As I was going, I was like, okay, I'm going to get ready. I'm going to try to love it. I'm going to go in and do as best I can and do my job. And by 8 o'clock, that would be kind of not the attitude anymore. And I fell into this rut, and I wasn't able to get out until I then got out of education.
How would you say that this feeling impacted your personal life? So not just professionally, where by 8 a.m. we already don't want to go to work.
Right.
How is it impacting the rest of your life?
I mean, I think it was a perfect storm. So I got divorced in 2020. COVID was a lot for everybody, and it was a lot for me. I got divorced. My dad passed away. There's just different things that happened over the course of that 3 years that really, like I said, is a perfect storm. So even if I had been really excited about my career still, I still had the difficulty of the divorce and of taking care of the kids and of not seeing my kids all the time, even though, there's a lot to be said for, I being a workaholic and avoiding the kids at some points, because I couldn't handle all of it. And so yeah, I mean, it's all my personal life. On one hand, you could say it went to pot, in a sense, but I think it got 100 times better because I was listening and because I was following my heart and following the direction that I was given, in terms of just like, okay, well, you're not going to do another 10 years of this, so let's just cut it loose and see what happens with life coaching. And that's been, a really good thing for me. But it all came back to that perfect storm of the relationship and of the professional, and it was a lot. And it all shined on the burnout, really.
Do you feel like when you started life coaching that you were also healing yourself from the burnout? And so as you became healed, you were then able to really focus on that and see that as a place that you could really impact other people's lives.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I started doing my mindset work I think 4 or 5 years ago, and it was something that came along. I was doing some work online, and people started talking about, it wasn't positive thinking, but it was just thinking differently. And I had always struggled with positive thinking because I treated it like a party trick, like it was a tip, like think positive and like everything's going to work out, and that's not how it works. But I didn't know that, so once I figured that out, I started that, and I I credit all that to coaching and being coachable. And so as I continued listening and getting coached, then when I got divorced and I started, I needed, I mean, at that point, I needed so much help, but I didn't, I had no one to turn to because it was COVID. And interestingly, my father was a domestic relations attorney for 50 years. So things would have been way different, but he was 3 weeks away from dying of brain cancer. And so he never even knew what happened to me, in terms of the divorce.
Mhm.
So, but that coaching, I was able to I got some advice, but I started realizing that I could help other single dads because I knew enough to be dangerous with it. And I was trying to help people with that. And then I got into other things, and it all kind of came back to, as a teacher, as an officer in the army, as a bike tour director, like all that stuff was coaching. So ultimately I've been doing that for 30 years, and this then became okay, well, I got all this help. I still get all this help. I have coaches. I have a business coach. I have, I have mindset coaches. I have mentors and friends that I work with. And so I'm a product of the product, but that helps me to help other people as best I can, and effectively. This is something I've done professionally, I believe, for 30 years, and now I'm just doing it in a much different way, like a much more condensed way that I feel is most effective and suits what I can do right now in my life. Like, this is the impact that I can now have with my life's work, and that's I found my way again, and that's how I got out of the burnout, and that sort of thing.
I love that you mentioned having coaches and mentors and people that are helping you with your journey,
Mhm,
because I feel like so many people want to look at it as a fairy tale. And it's, oh, okay, I'm going to take this course, I'm going to get fixed magically, and then I can quit working on me and now I can move on and start helping other people.
mhm,
But I feel like it's a lot like fitness. If you work really hard and get to that point where you wanna be, if you just stop, then you're likely going to regress back to where you were before.
mhm.
So will you talk a little bit about the importance in your success and in your wellness of your coaches and how you impart that on the people that you work with?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the most important things for me is that I do express that I come by this through coaching. This is not something that I just did on a whim, and so eh, helping a client understand that, like, no, this is what I've been through. Like, I'm not coaching on something I haven't been through. Like, they're part of me. I have a lot of friends who are empty nesters, and they're coming to the point where their kids are graduating from high school, and they're kind of like, what do I do now? And while I understand that, and I completely see what would be difficult, and I know I can help them through that, I wouldn't want to make that my niche, because I have not done that yet. Maybe when my kids go to college, maybe that might be a time, but I coach in what I know, and I coach through the coaching that I've gotten. But I also believe that I'm a really good coach because, like, I've been through it, like, the I'm my I've talked to people about, like, I talked to my mom, and she was like, "Well, you're having a really hard time." And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's what makes me a good coach." Like, I wouldn't want to be coached by someone that, like, everything went well, because I wouldn't be able to relate to them necessarily. So that also is something that helps me, because when I look back at the stuff that I've been through and how I've made it, I that again, it goes back to my ability to help other people with my story. It's not that I'm like the greatest coach because I've been through all this stuff. It's that I have been through all this stuff, and so have you. And here's how we can do it together. Like, this is what I did. This is what I see you being capable of. I believe in you more than you believe in yourself right now, and let's go.
I love the vulnerability because I do think a lot of people put on that facade. They want to look perfect because they feel like, well, nobody's going to want to come learn from me or listen to me if I don't have all my shit together.
Hmm.
But I love how you approach it, that, you're real and raw and honest and saying, no, I get where you're at because I was there. So I can help you get to this side. How meaningful is that for you to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's everything. That's why I'm focusing on the burnout. Prior to the burnout, I was really focusing on self-confidence because I had come from a place of very little self-confidence, and I knew I could help people with that, having helped, students with that, and people in life, because I had gone through moments and eras of my life where I had zero self-confidence. So I knew how to gain it, and how to use it. So, but when it came to, like, self confidence is absolutely important, but I feel like I can have a much more meaningful impact on people with burnout, because here's the thing: when I look at my career and I am in education, when I look at my career in education and realize that I was a good educator. Like I was a solid educator. And I there's part of me that thinks like because I didn't understand it, because I didn't have help with the burnout, I didn't even know to ask. That like a lot of people lost out on me being around as an educator. And I say that humbly, but there's a point where I have to think like, man, if I had been able to solve that problem and find my way again, I might have been able to help on a grander scale than ultimately I wasn't. I don't regret it. I'm very glad that I'm helping people in the way that I am, and I feel now that this is the important work that I was called to do. But I hope that makes sense. Like, at a certain point, it's like if I could help that, and I feel that professionals, you know, people who are burnt out don't necessarily have to quit their jobs. They don't have to get out of their careers, but they have to rekindle their relationship and their commitment and their connection to their careers. So I try to help them. One thing about like leaving a relationship or leaving a job that I really harp on is that I want whoever it is I'm talking to fall in love with it again, or to really try to be in love with it like they once were, so that if they decide to leave, they're not doing it for the wrong reason. Like you can say you hate your job and hate your job and then quit, and then suddenly it's like, well, now I don't have the job and I hate my life, and it turned out that it was my life that I hated, and now I don't have the refuge of going to the job. And that's another part of this that you have to. It's all finesse, as with anything.
Something that I found interesting that you just said was that when somebody is experiencing burnout, they don't always have to leave that position or that career and go into something entirely different. I think a lot of us often think that way. When people are feeling that stress or that burnout, they think they just have to walk away, find a different path. So, what helped you to learn that that wasn't necessarily the case and that people could potentially rekindle that romance with their career and get past the burnout?
Sure. So yeah, so I had started this 2 or 3 years prior, and I'm very fortunate to have done that, because if I had decided to leave in the way that I did without some sort of structure, I would have just jumped back into another job. And one of the in education, and one of the things that I really came away with was like I really dislike what I'm doing, and I don't want to. I don't want to go back into something just for the sake of having a paycheck and health insurance and all that. Like it's not fair to me, it's not fair to my kids, it's not fair to the students or the teachers, whoever. That's just not fair. I probably could have done it, but it just wouldn't have been fair to any of it, anybody. And so but it took a lot to say, okay, I had something in place, um, and I was able to move into that. So I think when if someone's starting to think like I want to quit, they're going to have some other thing in mind. And if they don't, they'll have to figure it out. But ultimately, that's one of the things that, if someone comes to me, when someone comes to me and I talk to them about it, it's like, okay, well, let's try to rekindle the relationship, but also let's start looking at an exit plan, right? Let's start, okay, where are your savings? What do you have? How long can you go without a job to to start a business, or to start a consulting firm, whatever you want to do? How long is it that you can just be on your own before it's like, the ends don't meet anymore. So it's a delicate balance, but it can be done. I think that's the ultimate thing, is that like it's not impossible. It feels impossible. It feels like a life sentence, especially when you're 50, and you've got all these responsibilities. But ultimately, like you can't allow it to be a life sentence. And yeah, so it's a fine line, not a fine. It's a finesse job with helping people with it, because it's a lot to think about.
We hear a lot lately about wellness and wellness at work and, doing things in the workplace that are supposed to make us less stressed and more productive. Do you think that workplaces in general are doing enough to help fight burnout? Or do you think burnout is something that truly comes from within each individual? So there's not really much that a company can do to affect it.
Uh, I think that's like that's the ultimate question, right? The So what I'll say is I absolutely don't think that we're doing enough to prevent it. But it's an angle, there's a way that we have to look at it so that we can coddle the people that need to be coddled, right? So when you say like, and I've thought about this, like I've thought about going into human resources departments and saying, I want to talk to your people about burnout if they're feeling that like they're burnt out. I want to talk to them to make sure that they can recover, and but I have to do it in such a way that it helps the bottom line, right? It helps to say, okay, well, you're going to lose these people, and then you're going to have to train all these other people. But then when you look at like the easy things that you can do to prevent burnout or to realize that you're burnt out, it sometimes it comes down to, until you get into the weeds of it. When you're do if I was to do like a 2 hour workshop with a human resources, or like a team of administrators in a corporation, it really looks like, you just cut through it. Like, yeah, you're exhausted. You work for a Fortune 500 company, right? Like, you're gonna be exhausted. You miss time with your family because you like that's why you get paid as much as you do. So it's really hard to think about, like, someone saying I'm burned out, and like, well, what are your symptoms? And well, I'm really tired. I'm irritable. Well, join the club. Like, that's how it goes. So there's that prevention aspect of it, and that's where I go back to, like, we're going to lose a lot of good people that are doing a lot of good work if we don't help them identify it. Because I really don't like when a person, and I've thought a lot about this, when a person is burnt out or is susceptible to burnout, they're not going to know until it's too late, right? Like, it never would have occurred to me that this was an issue for me. It would have just been like, this is just what I did. I did this for 30 years. And so I wouldn't have seen it as burnt out. I would have just seen it as like, well, it's just tired, like this is all part of the deal. Um, and so yeah, so I don't think we're doing enough, but I don't know exactly what we could do in terms of like talking to higher ups in leadership and HR, and trying to figure out how to help them help their employees. But then when you go to an employee and you're like, well, go for a walk for 20 minutes, or breathe, and they're like, a burnout person's not going to want to, like, the type of person that gets burnt out is not going to want to hear, like, just breathe for a minute, be kind to yourself. That's just not how it works, as
Yeah,
far
they're
as
gonna
I'm
say,
concerned.
"I don't
As
have
far as
time
I'm
for that."
concerned. What's that? Yeah, I don't know who has time to breathe. Um, and it's true. Like, it's actually a friend of mine just sent, is an do you know the Onion?
Mhm.
The Onion. So that one of the headlines was, study finds US employees waste 2 million hours annually spending time with their family and friends. they they waste all these work hours, and it was just like, that's exactly what it is.
Right.
And yeah, so part of my, like, when I talk to people, and part of what I'm trying to bring people in with is that, because I battle with this, and it's I I I realize that, like, okay, taking 3% of your time back at work. So if you work a 10-hour day, like people that are earning six figures and are burnout, three, that you're definitely working 10 hours, and if not like 12 or 14. So taking 3% of your working day back, guess how much that is?
Oh, you're making me do math here, but it's gonna be minutes, right? Like, it's not gonna be a ton of time.
Yeah, it's 18 minutes, right? And 18 minutes sounds ridiculously easy, but it's also like this like huge boulder of a thing for someone that doesn't have, they really believe they don't have 18 minutes. And that's where, and you can get like, okay, well, stop hanging around, like, don't look at your phone, or don't like hang around someone's office and BS with them. But ultimately, like, it's 18 minutes, and it seems ridiculous, but like trying to get someone to take deliberately, intentionally take 18 minutes back, that's a big ask. Right. One of the other things I ask people to do is spend 2% of their income per month on themselves. Just blow 2%. It's like, it's $120, from a six-figure income. Like that's nothing. But like deliberately go, and you have to spend it every month. Like you go and buy yourself a watch, or go and buy yourself a, go to a concert or whatever. Just go use that money because you make all this money. You're doing it for a reason, which among all the other things, but like just blow some money, like you have it, like that's why you're doing it. And just to remember that you're a person and you're not work, or you're not everything to everybody else. You still have to like find yourself within. And that's a huge, it's people forget that by the time they're my age, and by the time they're by the time they're burnt out, it's like it's not that it's too late, but it's like the more the later it is, the more you have to reel it back in.
I want to talk a little bit about working from home, which has become much more prevalent, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
since the pandemic. Now, for me, I'm I'm the kind of person that a company wants to work from home because I have trouble shutting off. I'm sitting on the couch and I'm like, well, I'm just sitting on the couch. So if I'm still working, what's the big deal?
Hmm.
And then you have the flip side of people who, you see the memes of they're like taking a work call and they're, pushing their cart through Target.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, do you feel like there has been either an uptick or a decrease in burnout since more people are working from home? So, are more people like me and overdoing it, or doing it the right way and setting boundaries?
I mean, I have no idea about like statistically. So everything I will say is how I would think commonsensically. But I think the one thing is that when you work from home, the boundaries are, you think the boundaries are set up so you're, because you're at home, but they're way worse. And I don't think that's rocket science either, but it's worth saying it. This morning I was, I don't have my kids. It's just me right now. My kids are, I get them back tomorrow night. And so I woke up this morning and I walked out of my bedroom, and then and like my office is two doors down. So I walked like three steps, and I was like, "Oh, I'm at work." I was like, "This is great." And there's a lot of good things that come with that, but there's also a sense of like I have to get outside. Like I actually I don't know if I left the house today because I'm going out tonight. I'm going to meet a friend to talk about some things, and I've had phone calls and Zoom calls and this, and but I haven't actually physically opened the door to get out of the house. And I don't like that. I don't like that part of it. But if I'm intentional about it, then I will get out of the house. So I knew, like, had I known that, had I not had the dinner plan with my friend to talk about the business, um, I would have gone out at some point, but I just didn't because I knew I was gonna get out. So there's social aspect of it. You can really sink into yourself and go to some dark places if you're not careful, especially if you're not used to working from home. So I mean, in terms of like, I don't know if it's relieving burnout. My guess is that it isn't, because people are now like coming down on people and saying like, "Well, you just work from home. Like, what do you do? You work in pajamas all day." And um, and that's, so I would imagine that there's that, like the fight against. I mean, even just like what I just said, I had to explain this dinner that I'm going to as something I'm doing for work. I can't just go out to dinner and like be with a friend. I have to like justify it with work. And that's just that's where we are, right? That's part of the burnout structure of my life, of anyone's life, really.
Do you think that technological tools help? And what I mean is, so everybody knows I'm an Apple person all the way,
Mhm.
which I used to not be. I used to hate Apple. I am a converted individual. So I won't mention this brand, but there is another software that actually has you do a virtual commute. So
Mhm.
you can set up the time if you do work from home. And let's say it's 15 minutes before your workday ends, and it will say, "Hey, Claudia, it's time for your virtual commute." And
Mhm.
I always just, it sounds great, but I just click it and it disappears. But are tools like that helpful if we would allow them to be, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the work is there to do. I've never heard of that, but it sounds awesome. If as so long as you obey it, or like, so long as you do it. Um, but yeah, I mean, the I think people are figuring out that that's not just a gimmick. It sounds gimmicky, but it's also like a very real thing. because that was like I was at my uh, I struggled the most when I could most of my teaching career, I lived 5 minutes from work. So there was no like leave 900 kids behind and get to three and their mom, and that was like there was just there was no buffer there. Um, and so I think that creating that buffer that intentionally is good. I think that certainly could help. I haven't looked into tools like that, or I haven't thought that deeply into what's happening outside of this whole phenomenon.
You said earlier that people who are experiencing burnout generally are the last to know. I'm paraphrasing what you said.
Mm-hmm,
But you said generally the people that are really in it don't realize they're in it.
hmm
So, what are some things that either they can look for or loved ones and friends can look for as signs and symptoms to be able to kind of raise that flag earlier rather than later so they can start working on it and put themselves in a better position
hmm
sooner?
hmm I think there's certainly the fatigue and the exhaustion, the irritability, and the like drinking more, smoking more, with the vices that we get into. I So yes, there's that, but I think also, and I think more importantly, because that can be signs of anything. And like I said, people get exhausted. From my experience and what I'm trying to help others see is that I completely disengaged with my career, and I watched it happen, and I tried, and I like I said, I tried to go into work, and I tried to psych myself up, and I tried to get ready, and it just wasn't happening, and I don't want to say I don't want to say it wasn't my fault, but there like I take responsibility for all of it. But had I mean, I tried. I tried really hard to bring that back. So my point is, I guess, is if you loved something and then you start realizing that it's like you are disengaged with it and you're not interested in not being disengaged with it, that's a huge sign. One of the things I ask people to do is to ask for something new. Like I could have gone to my boss and said, "Listen, like I'm not all that interested right now, but like I think I would be really good at this. Can I take this on?" And it sounds counterintuitive asking for a new project when you're on the verge of burnout, but there's that sense of purpose. I think a lot of burnout and a lot of the way that things happen and end up come from a lack of that purpose that you went into that work to do. And so I think that's number one is a sign that I think is really it's a very important thing to watch out for and to listen to. Um, and then the other one I think is just the I guess the sort of that negativity of your like hopelessness in it. Like so, even if no matter how much you try or no matter how much you do, it's still not going to help anything. And you look around, and you're like, golly, I can't even. There's nothing I can do. When you start saying there's nothing I can do, then that's you're pitching yourself out, and that you're tucking yourself out of the game, and and sometimes you need to do that. But like when you start thinking negatively like that, when you start um, being bored and not being able to re-engage, like there's points where I'm like, I'm at work and I'm like I'm looking at my phone and hoping no one knocks on my door, and you know, but when you do that too often, or when you're doing that to the point where you're like, I really should get back to work, but like this looks pretty funny, that's where that's kind of the flip of the switch there. So
So you're saying we should set a timer on looking at the dog memes on Instagram.
right, yeah, or not look at them at all. Put your phone on airplane mode, but and leave it there. And I found it's fascinating to me that I've fallen this deep into the well of the phone, and how intentional I have to be of like not the only reason I have it here now is because it is on airplane mode, but I wanted to reference that Onion article. Um, but it's pervasive, and we all know that. but we have a hard time fighting it, even though we know it.
And I do that too, and the other thing I do that's really silly is I will be sitting in front of my laptop with my phone, and I'll be working, but on my phone. So it's
Mhm,
like, "Oh, let me just send this email from here," or, "Let
mhm,
me check, this website." So, now I've got 3 screens in front
mhm,
of me that I'm working off of, which is probably even more stressful, I would
mhm,
guess.
mhm. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think email has been, there's a Pavlov's dog element to it. And that actually came to me, like, when I was in the army, in 1990. This was in 1998, I think, that we had just gotten an email, and it was like, R. Mitchell at like 18 different things at the end, because it was a military address. And I remember I was in my office, and my platoon sergeant was there, and the second in command came down, and he was like hollering at me. He's like, "The colonel just emailed you," and I was like, okay, like, why don't you just call me? And so, but it was like I had to have that bell on. And so then I was like, well, I wasn't going to miss an email again, because I didn't want to get chewed out. So I went racing up to the colonel, and whatever he needed me to do, I did. But then I came back, and I looked at my platoon sergeant. I was like, I got to figure out how to put this bell on, because he told me you got to put the bell on. So he he showed me how to do the bell, and like, almost 30 years later, I'm still like, what? There's an email. I have to look at it. But it is like, that's a sense of, you have to be able to do that, and or you have to have that, and there are no boundaries. And we try to do that. I mean, there's businesses, and I know where I was working, they had, you weren't allowed to email after 10, but on like Friday afternoon during the summer. So it wasn't like all year. It was like, Friday at 10 in the summertime, you don't, no one emails. And then you get back on it at, 8 o'clock on Monday morning. So, but that's in the summertime, when most people are like, there's nothing really going on all that much anyway in the school system.
What is your thought on work email or apps, Teams and those kind of things on personal devices? Like, do you feel like that just exacerbates the problem because this thing that I'm holding in my hand now at 8 p.m., enjoying time with my family, and I
Hmm.
get that ding,
Right.
so I feel like I
Right.
got to go look at it. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a necessary evil. I don't know if we can go back. There's so many things that I don't think we can go backwards on. That said, I did not have my email on my phone, which was another telltale sign of, like, I'm disengaging. So it wasn't, I was disengaging because I wanted to pay attention to my family, and that was another way. I also didn't like, whenever I saw certain names come over my email, I would get tweaked, and I
Mhm.
didn't want to deal with that. So because if it's there, it's there. So if, on the weekend, if I saw someone's name come through, it could ruin my weekend. So I took it off. I took the calendar off. I took the email off, and it didn't go over very well. I wasn't public about it, but I was less responsive to email. And yeah, I think people certainly, they had an inkling, that I was less engaged than I maybe should have been. But I also, like, I'm uninterested. That's, again, like, I'm uninterested in working on the weekends when I've got my kids, or when I don't have my kids. You know, like, I don't. I didn't. I'm done working on the weekends. you know.
I feel like we need to get back to that point. There are positions that are essential at all times and you have to be on call and that's different, but yeah, I think just as a society, let's make this happen that we take
Mm,
back our evenings and weekends or whatever time of day it is that you're not technically on the clock.
right.
Would that help our
Right.
burnout?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Um, I mean, yeah, I can't imagine it wouldn't. But I don't know if it's possible. Like, I think it's too far gone. It's like AI. Um, we're not reeling that we're not putting that toothpaste back in back in the tube, which is fine. Like, that's where the world led us, and it is interesting as an English teacher. Um, I don't know what I would do if I was still teaching English, because I struggle with plagiarism, and there's a whole. I mean, when you're writing and reading, and it's like there's this whole. moral obligation to like not plagiarize, but now it's like you almost can't not plagiarize. So it's that I'm glad I'm not involved in that world anymore. It was hard enough when I was doing it without the
Right?
AI.
All right, let's leave that world behind. Before I let you go, we're going to go into a whole different world and we're going to talk a little bit about tattoos.
Hmm.
As you know, I love tattoos.
Hmm.
Um, I have a bunch of tattoos that we can actually see today because it's still really hot out. Now, I know that you have at least one tattoo that I
Hmm.
hear might have a pretty good story attached to it. So I would love to hear your tattoo story.
Sure. So, and I've been thinking about this since we met. But yes, I have one tattoo. I got it when I was in the army, and it's a guitar that has a black rose on the bottom and like red roses and a vine going up. And there was some symbolism about music makes the world better, and that I think there's six roses for my friend who was the number six in the soccer, and he has my initials tattooed on his ankle, whatever. Um, so that was like, so I remember designing it on a plane. I don't know when, but then I was living in Oklahoma at Fort Sill. I was stationed at Fort Sill, and there was a guy there that had the first weekend we were there. He bought a motorcycle. It's a big giant guy. He was a football player, bodybuilder, and he went and bought a motorcycle. And it was like August of in 1995 in Oklahoma. So he bought this motorcycle and it never moved because the wind and the weather, you couldn't ride a motorcycle, or at least he couldn't. So he would come and be like, "Hey, you want to go to Dallas this weekend?" I'd be like, "Yeah, yeah." And then he's like, "Can you drive?" Okay, yes. So anyways, we went to Dallas, and there's this big guy, and we were both wanting to get tattoos. So we went to Dallas, and I don't know how we came upon this tattoo shop. We didn't do any research, but he wanted to get there was a cartoon on MTV called The Tick. Do you remember
Mhm.
that? And there's so he went first, and he sat down, and the guy, like, all I remember is that he looked like he was going to cry because of, not because of the pain, but because of the size of this tattoo, and it's like he didn't realize what he had actually asked for. So he finished up, and then I got, and as we're talking, the guy's telling me that he learned a tattoo on pigs, and that his parents were Harley Davidson people, and they just like they'd have these parties, and he would tattoo these pigs, and that's how they learned. But as I'm talking to him, and I didn't realize this, but at my foot, the tattoos on my ankles, so my foot is like this, so the muscles are going like this. Well, when I stand up, the muscles retract or whatever, and so now the neck of the guitar is crooked, so you can't really even tell what it is. And that's part of the reason, because this guy learned on tattoos instead of, I mean, I don't know where you learned, but he certainly wasn't like the professional that we would have today. So that was the tattoo. And then when I got home, like the next morning, or like when I went back to post, um, the captain saw that I had my sock up, and he laid into me, and he's like, "What the hell happened to your leg?" And I was like, "Well, I got a tattoo." And he was like, "You're property of the United States Army." And I was like, "All right, I'm not interested in that at all." So that was not helpful for me as a career person, to be told that I was property of the United States Army. But he was trying to make a point, and I wasn't taking it. So yeah, that's my tattoo story. So I guess the moral of the story is, find out where the person learned how to do how to do tattoos, and make sure that you're okay with that, and make sure your muscles are tense the way that you want to be tensed.
Might you get it redone or covered?
No, I mean, it's been 31 years or whatever it is now, so I know I'm not all that concerned about it. It doesn't bother me.
I was so excited too as you were saying guitar and all this. So I hope at some point that you will send me a picture of this tattoo because I am dying to see it.
Okay.
Rich, where can people find you? So if they want to talk to you about burnout, if they
Mhm.
want to talk to you about coaching, if they also want to see this crooked guitar tattoo, where can they find you?
Sure. So my website is burnouttofulfillment.com. And what I'm offering, I have a free PDF that it's a checklist of five signs that you're burning out. I've talked about them a lot in our conversation tonight. And then it has five ways that you can recover from those, or start solving those problems. So again, if you're finding yourself bored at work and you just don't find any purpose, like go ask something new. And the most important one is ask for help, right? Like that's a huge, there's all kinds of like toxic masculinity in that, and being willing to ask for help, and not like showing your cards when you're asking for help in terms of the corporation or whatever. It's that's a very real fear. um and it's a justified fear. So at any rate, so like that's the most important thing. And I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but make sure that regardless, there's help available. I can help, but asking for help in some capacity is really going to be what you need to do. Because you can't, like, I really don't think you can do this alone because of the way it is, and the way we structure ourselves and the way we work. So yeah, so that's that. The PDF is a checklist. You go to burnout2fulfillment.com, get that PDF. And then I also, in that, you can sign up. You would sign up for a launch call. And what that is it's a discovery call where we set up and figure out, okay, what's happening. It's a quick 30-minute call. What's happening? What do you need right now to get you on the road to recovery, and figure out what the next steps are. But that launch call is key, because we look at the symptoms, like the specific thing, like the specific inspiration behind you coming to this website in the first place. That's what we need to talk about, because you wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be on the website if you weren't, needing the help. So it's burnout2fulfillment.com. Yeah, that gets you to it's like the open door to my entire world. But that's where you land. And that's where I can help people the most. When I know they're coming in, I can help them with whatever they need.
Awesome. Well, Rich, I appreciate your time today. I think you have given so much amazing information that is really going to be helpful to people who maybe are on that verge of burnout, not really sure what to do, feeling those kind of beginning stages, and now they have somewhere to turn. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for let me talk about it. It's so important.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media so you'll never miss what's going on. Remember, until next week, you are strong enough, you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.